What we're seeing from the Democratic Party is a party that is out of step with where the people are in many different ways, right? We're seeing this across different issues, whether that is Medicare for all, whether that is supporting Zoran Mamdani in New York. In many ways, there isn't a bigger divide than where the people are and where the Democratic establishment is on the situation in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, especially since October 7th. Recently, Pete Buttigieg sat down with Dean Winters for a conversation. The conversation was pretty good. They covered several different issues. But I want to hone in on Pete's answers on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, because it gives you a glimpse into the problems that we're seeing right now with the establishment in the Democratic Party. And it's not just Pete Buttigieg. Obviously, this video is about him and this conversation. But this also applies to the Richie Tories of the world, obviously the Biden-Harris, wing of the party, and many others. This is a big picture issue that the Democrats that are in power right now need to wake up to. And it's very frustrating, especially watching somebody like Pete, who tends to be pretty thoughtful about several different issues, very well spoken, and seems to just not have a good answer when it comes to what we should be doing about Israel, given the fact that they have been committing a genocide the last 2 years and continue to commit mass atrocities not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank, and continue to run an apartheid state. This is where we are, and yet people like Pete Buttigieg just seem to not be with the times. And just to remind folks who I am a human rights and atrocity prevention advocate first and foremost. I also happen to be Jewish. And so while I know that there's going to be people that will come into my comments and will hit me up and say, try to call me names like being anti-Semitic, I am Jewish. I was raised Jewish. My entire family is Jewish. I have friends and colleagues in Israel and in Palestine. And I think that we need to be able to approach this issue like we would approach any other issue in the world, any other issue where there are gross violations of human rights, mass atrocities that are being committed, and other just oppressive issues that we need to be dealing with. So let's take a look at some of the conversation. I'll provide some commentary and some reactions, and here we go.
And I'm really curious about what your response is going to be here. We have seen a growing sentiment that is anti-Israel, that is standing against the state of Israel in the American youth, not just on the left, but on both sides. I think according to a recent poll that I just read, 71% of Democrats at the age of 50 or younger, and 50% of Republicans at the age of 50 or younger do not think that we should be supporting the state of Israel. They're anti-Israel. And this is a trend that we've seen boom. This is a trend that I think is going to continue to grow. And honestly, it's a trend that I'm personally on board with. I'm not that big of a fan either. And I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of this praxis that we see here of maybe this discrepancy between the Democratic Party and between the Republican Party too, and the American people, with this growing disagreement, honestly, where when I look towards the Democrats in Congress, when I look towards, the DNC, right, they're saying one thing, and then me and 71% of other Democrats under the age of 50 are saying a complete other thing. How do you look at this growing sentiment of being anti-Israel? What do you think it means for America? And where do you see this going with such strong disagreements, even within your own party, from the congressional level to the personal level?
Okay, so first of all, just from Dean's point of view, and obviously he's able to say whatever he wants to say, but I personally don't think it is very helpful whenever we frame not just this situation, but any situation as being purely pro or purely anti. Because for too long, especially in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, the camps really have been, are you pro-Israel? Are you anti-Israel? Are you pro-Palestine? Are you anti-Palestine? And I don't think that is a useful use of language to be able to encapsulate the wide variety of views and opinions that people can have about this situation. Similarly, for many other situations that exist in the world. If you look at a situation like what's happening in Sudan, there is an ongoing civil war between the SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, and the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. There are mass atrocities that are being committed by both sides there. There are many Sudanese and non-Sudanese, people like me who've been working on Sudan for many years, I stand with the people of Sudan. I don't necessarily stand with Sudan, the government, whatever the government is that exists or doesn't exist, the de facto government currently. And I think, it would be weird to say I'm anti-Sudan because of what the government or the people that are in power are doing to their own people in this case. Similarly, for Israel, I get why it's easier to frame, especially since the 7th and the genocide that has been going on, to be anti something, right? But it's just not useful. I don't think that is a useful use of term. But here we are.
What I believe is there's a difference between being against the behavior of the Israeli government, the conduct of Netanyahu, the settlements, the annexation, the atrocities that took place toward the Palestinian people in Gaza, versus being against or for the security of the Israeli people, their ability to live and not be wiped off the map, which is the agenda of everybody from Hamas to the Iranian regime and a lot of other people around them. I think both of those things can be true at the same time. And I know a lot of people who, through historical experience or life experience, believe that Jewish people will not be safe anywhere unless there is a Jewish homeland. And I think you can believe that and oppose, as by the way, many on the Israeli left and center left courageously do, the conduct of the government there. So I think the question for the US is how can we support freedom, peace, and self-determination for both peoples on this small piece of land, Israelis and Palestinians. And I've been there. I've seen, if you go in a helicopter, you can see from the river to the sea at the same time. This is a small piece of land. And have a way for there to actually be lasting peace there. But I think these things can all be true at the same time. And I do believe that, look, obviously.
Okay, so Pete has somewhat of a similar approach that I just laid out, but also a pretty significant difference, right? So yes, you can make a distinction between the Israeli people and the government for sure. But he took it a step further and said, it's about the security of the Israeli people and to ensure that they are not going to be wiped off the face of the map like many in the region want to see happen, which is a true statement. But it's interesting that he doesn't make that same distinction when it comes to Palestine, because there are many, many people within Israel, not only the government, not only the extremists, many people, the citizens of Israel, that want to see Palestine wiped off the map. And that means the complete erasure of the Palestinian people, removing them from the land forcibly, either through ethnic cleansing or outright genocide. And that is also a reality. So to use, Pete's turn of phrase, both things can be true, right? There are those who 100% want to see Israel and the Israeli people out of Israel or completely killed off. And there are Israelis and many, within the Israeli government that would like to see the same thing for the Palestinian people. That is a point of truth, and I think it's important that we recognize it. Secondly, I don't understand this talking point, and he is not the only one who has made this. President Joe Biden famously has said this throughout his entire political career, that Jews would not be safe unless there is this Jewish homeland. Jews anywhere would not be safe, right? Including in the United States of America. President Biden said this while he was president. So it's a little weird when you think about somebody who is the supposed most powerful man on earth to say he couldn't protect Jews that were here in America if there weren't in Israel. A little bizarre. But I don't understand why this is a talking point. As I mentioned before, I am Jewish. I have never felt, as well as many friends and family that I've spoken to, have never felt more under threat, more targeted than when Israel is doing something bad. And there's actually data to back this up. When Israel is abusing Palestinians and there is like an uptick in that kind of violence that is being publicized, attacks on Jews, anti-Semitic attacks increase significantly. So this idea that, we need Israel for Jews that are anywhere else in the world to be safe is just a figment of ridiculous propaganda. And in fact, for many people that are not in Israel, many Jews that are not in Israel, they feel the most unsafe when Israel is doing bad things. Because other than that, anti-Semitism, while it is 100% a thing and continues to be a problem, and we need to address it, the spikes in anti-Semitism tend to happen in correlation with when Israel is doing bad things. I think it's also important to recognize that it's, the Israeli people, while there have been protests against Netanyahu, even before the 7th, there was a lot of protests. They wanted to see him gone. In many ways, Netanyahu is like the Trump of Israel. There are plenty of people that do support him. Remember, he's been in power not consecutively, but for many years. For most of my life, he's been in power. And that wing of the Israeli government continues to rise, right? So, for as little of a democracy as Israel is, they still do have democratic, norms. They do elect their, parliamentarians and prime minister. He has won these elections, and his far right, conglomerate continue to win as well. So we shouldn't ignore that. I'm not casting that blame on the entire Israeli population, but there have been several polls that have shown that the Israeli people, by and large, do support ethnic cleansing, annexation, etc. And for those that supposedly don't, or whatever, there's a tacit support because they're not standing in the way of that. You don't see that many Israelis going on protection missions to stop settlers from settler violence in the West Bank, right? This expansion that continues to happen. You don't see, there are some, there's breaking the silence and others, people that had served in the IDF that have come out and spoken out about how horrible the IDF treats Palestinians. But by and large, these are few and far between, and it is definitely a small minority of the population, and they often are chastised for the work that they do.
There have been a lot of failures in US politics when it comes to preventing what has happened in Gaza, and when it comes to generally making sure that there is peace and safety for both of the peoples in this land. I also don't think in the long run that we can expect that this will get better when you have somebody like Donald Trump in power, somebody who sees, I think, a kindred spirit in Netanyahu. Netanyahu, somebody who has no regard for even the possibility of a two-state solution, is doing everything he can to sabotage that, actually, which is really what these settlements and this talk of annexation is about. And I think that there will not be any kind of lasting peace in the region until we have an America that is, yes, more willing to use its leverage to shape the actions of the Israeli government, but also finds a way to do that in a way that doesn't give quarter to those who really do want to wipe this country and its people off of the map.
It's interesting, he is obviously taking this opportunity to poke at Donald Trump, which sure, but his boss, when Pete was serving in the Biden administration, was Joe Biden, who continued to arm Netanyahu at the worst pieces of the violence that was happening in Gaza. And his own staff have come out and said that Biden specifically was not willing to pressure Netanyahu to do any better. And so to only point blame at Trump and in this moment is at the very least like a dereliction of duty and completely dishonest to not be able to also call out your former boss for allowing, supporting, and protecting the genocidal regime to allow for it to continue to bomb and destroy and displace and kill and maim tens of thousands of Palestinians.
And I think maybe one of the reasons why we see this growing anti-Israeli sentiment is because of what you pointed out, the actions of the Israeli government, the actions of Netanyahu, and just how deplorable they've been in the eyes of so many, including myself. Specifically on the state of Israel, I don't know. My thoughts is I personally endorse, a multicultural democracy. In America, support a separation between church and the state. I support that globally too. I think that's a good thing. So that's where I lie. That's where a lot of people, that are younger in the Democratic Party and on the left lie, is multicultural democracies, ethno-states are just simply not a way forward. And that's where I stand. What are your thoughts?
So I think there is a unique situation there, but
it's interesting, and I applaud Alex for pointing this out here and taking, a very clear step in recognizing that Israel is an ethno-state, and in many other places around the world, most places around the world, including our home here, we don't want to see ethno-states. We actively push back against them, and we know how dangerous they can be. But for Pete to just very quickly say, oh, well, it's a unique situation, like, it just shows you, I don't know, slimy might not be the best word, but it seems like it's a slimy response, right? Israel, it's almost like how we, not we, me, but folks will try to say that America is exceptional. And so then, therefore, we can commit gross violations of human rights around the world, mass atrocities, invade countries, et cetera. We're the exceptional state. Like, why is Israel the exceptional state in being an ethno state and in support of that, right? We try to promote free and fair and open pluralities and democracies around the world. And yet now we stop at Israel's borders. And that tends to be one of the strongest allies that we have, and definitely the recipient of the most foreign aid consistently for decades. So I don't know. I know people are going to say that that is controversial, but I would tend to agree. And we see this kind of rhetoric and this mentality and this thinking coming from people like Zoran Mamdani as well. And I don't think it should be controversial to say that in a country, we should have people that have equal rights, that they don't have to go through religion and religiosity in order to get married, and that interethnic, interreligious marriages are not allowed. Like, this is what we're dealing with. And, the idea that in 2025, the United States has continued to prop up an apartheid regime is just, it's indefensible, frankly. It really is. And the fact that we haven't for years, whether it's a Democrat or Republican in office, done nothing to stop annexation in the West Bank, these, settlements, to push back against these, basically Israeli terrorists that are terrorizing Palestinians, it's a problem. And I get it. Like, there should be security for Israel, but I don't think that security should come at the cost of allowing for genocide to happen, allowing for apartheid, allowing for the continued, displacement and destruction of Palestinian homes in the West Bank. There's got to be a line, and we need to figure out what that is and realize that, this figment of our imagination of a two-state solution is impossible unless there's change both within the Israeli government and within whatever the Palestinian government has, which is, barely holding on. So we need new leaders. We need people to step up. But none of that is going to happen if the United States continues to write a blank check to Israel no matter what they do. And I'm glad that Pete mentioned, leverage. The United States has tremendous leverage over Israel, and we have never used it, which is deplorable.
I get it. I mean, I think so much depends on the steps that the Israeli government takes. I think one thing that Netanyahu should pay attention to is the fact that it's not just young people in general, but a lot of younger Jewish Americans who look at what's happening and say, I want no part of this. And if that continues, that could be lethal for Israel's future as a Jewish democratic state.
So it's interesting that Pete brings up here that younger Jewish folks are pushing back against this. Two reasons. One, Netanyahu and others have said that they really don't care that the American Jewish left, or whatever you want to call it, is pushing back on Israel because they have the Christian right. And they know that that is a strong power base for them. They know that they're able to get the arms, the money, the support, the protection at the United Nations from that. But what's also true is that Israel relies on this propaganda machine. They rely on young Jews from around the world to go to Israel, to move there, to, as they say, make aliyah, and to become Israeli citizens. That is what has allowed them to create this and perpetuate this ethno-state, while, mind you, preventing Palestinians from returning home, people that can trace decades and decades and decades of lineage back to land there. They prevent them from doing so, but allow any Jew from anywhere around the world to move to Israel and become an Israeli citizen. And that is why anytime that you see people that are being interviewed within the IDF or just on the streets of Israel or others, there's many of them that don't have an Israeli accent yet, because they likely recently moved there from the United States or from somewhere else. That is what has allowed Israel to remain a majority Jewish state, because they are forcibly, through apartheid again and different law systems, preventing Palestinians from returning to their lands and allowing Jews to help build up and populate the land that they call Israel.
But again, I think it's also really important. This is something we learned the hard way generationally when I was roughly your age and the U.S. went into Iraq, is to try to make some distinctions between what we think is right for us and what we think is right for others. And one of the things I'm really worried about is the desire to set up an ethno state right here in the United States. And I know that that is wrong for us.
I'm sorry. Again, I don't know if slimy is the right word, but this seems slimy to me. To try and make a equation between what's happening in Israel and what the US did in invading Iraq, those are two wildly different scenarios. And yes, I don't believe that the United States shouldn't be imposing its will on other countries through invasion, but we sure as hell can promote basic democratic values and human rights, as we do in many places around the world through, support. We used to do this through US aid, through, grants, through diplomacy, etc. And for Pete to try to say that, oh, we learned a lesson with Iraq, we shouldn't be imposing our will on other states, therefore, we should not be talking about how it's problematic that Israel is an ethno state, is, again, extremely disingenuous and slimy. I can go on and on here about the way in which Pete is approaching this and how I think it is problematic. But for me and for many others, I think in the next round of elections, these are things that are going to have to, they're going to have to do better. Like, if Pete is trying to build a campaign to run for president again, which I don't think he would have a shot really, but if this is the messaging that he's going to bring on the campaign trail, it's a losing message. And I don't know if he's being careful because of donors but you're missing the point of where the party is right now. And even more so than that, I think morally, I don't know that Pete has it in him to condemn in full force what Israel has done to the Palestinian people. I really don't, because this is not the first time that he's had these kinds of answers. And this is a problem. And it's a problem, again, I'm pointing it out with Pete with this video. I'm going to make some other videos about some other folks too. But this is a problem for America, for the world, for where we want to be as a country, for where we want to be as Democrats and in the Democratic Party. This is a problem. And I don't know if their polling is showing them that they need to, court those who still blindly support Israel or not, but something has got to give. And you have to do better than this. You have to do better.